afternoon. My name is Ben Forrett. I'm a director of clinical and translational research at Sanford Research, as well as a director of the CORDS Registry. On behalf of Global Genes, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this session on Beyond the Mission, building a sustainable culture for your organization, with our first talk from Tuesday Dyer, who is the executive director of CFC International. Thank you, Tuesday.
So hello, everyone. I'm Tuesday Dyer. I'm the executive director of CFC International, as Ben said, and I'm very excited to be here. And I'm also excited to have all of you here because I'm just going to say that sustainability really starts with recognizing that as a nonprofit, as a patient advocacy organization, that you do need to think about sustainability. The great news about what we're going to discuss today is that it's not new. There are best practices all around us of how to build sustainability. There's research behind what we're going to talk about today. There are plans in place, and it's pretty systematic. So it's not something that we need to necessarily stress about. One of the great experts that I'm going to mention at the end is Vu Lei, and if you don't already follow him, he has a nonprofit service called Nonprofit AF. And he talks a lot about how we can have these discussions in a calm and very collected way, really exploring the best practices. And one of the things he says to start this discussion is to think about something like baby animals, right? Think about little baby ducks or baby kittens, something that reduces your blood pressure, something that brings us down, something that really gets us to a place of feeling calm and not feeling like sustainability is a discussion that we should feel stressed about, because we really shouldn't. And we talk about sustainability so we feel less stressed. So the very first thing I'm going to talk about is infrastructure, right? And we hear this word infrastructure in nonprofit over and over again. And we ask ourselves, what does infrastructure look like for our organization? Who is going to be involved in this infrastructure process? What is infrastructure going to cost us? I know so many in this room probably think, I don't have the power to hire staff, or I'm burning the candle at both ends and I don't know how to stop. And why this work is not a one-man band. This work involves a lot of people, and those people may be volunteers, those people may be paid staff, those people may be experts that come in to provide you assistance and service whenever you need it. But first and foremost, they all begin, and infrastructure all begins by deciding why you're here. And I say this is a really important question because you have to decide why your organization exists. I hear so many times people say, I'm going to start a nonprofit because I want to raise money for cancer, children's cancer research. And we all can agree in this room that children's cancer research is extremely important. But there are a lot of organizations that do it. And when we become a competing organization of organizations already doing this good work, we detract from what they're doing. And we also detract from the fact that we have great ideas and we could be adding those ideas to the organizations that already exist. So think about why you are here. Why as a patient organization do you need to exist? Now, I can imagine in this room, it's going to be very easy to say, we're the only ones doing care for CFC syndrome, or we're the only ones doing care for Noonan syndrome. And that's probably the case for most of you. And so the reality is that question is already answered, but the next question needs to be, what do we want to achieve? What is our mission? And at the end of it, when we have achieved success, what will success look like? I often say in nonprofit sustainability is that, yes, we need to be sustainability for a really, really long time, but that time frame is for how long our community needs us. And at some point, we all want to put ourselves out of business, right? We all want to be in a place where we don't have to have our organizations anymore because no one is being diagnosed with the diseases that we we are working for, or that there's cures, or that there's such great treatment options that we really see patients come in and patients are able to get properly treated and get really successful treatments, and then we can move on. So we want the work we're doing right now to be a large scope of work, but ultimately we in nonprofit often say we're the only business that's in the business of putting ourselves out of business. So how will you know you've succeeded? Well, it's easy to say we succeeded if we find a cure, but let's think that's something much shorter and much more tangible than that. How we know we've succeeded is really deciding what your mission is, and then at the end, and then in pursuing your mission for your organization, what you hope to achieve as a result of that mission. So at CFC International, our mission is to improve the quality of life for individuals with CFC syndrome and their families. And we do that through education, we do that through research, and we do that through patient support, right? So those three things always keep us in line. And here's what I'm going to say about that. 10 years from now, when you all are running these amazingly successful organizations that are super sustainable, you're also going to be asking yourself this question repeatedly. Why are we here? What is our mission? It's the one question that we constantly have to return to as we're creating sustainability for our organizations. Always checking in to make sure we're okay, to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do, to make sure that we should still be doing what we said we would do, and that it hasn't changed. I apologize, there we go. So in infrastructure, when we talk about asking that question of mission and then beyond mission, where do we go next? We really are talking about infrastructure. And infrastructure seems to be this thing that we skip over. And Ann and I were having this great conversation the other day, and I said, one of the things that frustrates me the most about the sustainability discussion is that everybody knows they need a mission. Everybody knows they need attainable goals. But then somewhere in that process, we skip infrastructure and we decide we're going to go to doing even more before we've decided that we can actually do everything that we said we would do from the beginning. And so before we begin expanding our impact around the world, we have to decide who is on our bus, who are our paid staff, who are our volunteers, what roles do people play? And I know that our other speakers, Amanda and Melissa, are going to talk a lot about sustainability through boards and really building your board to reflect what you need from the organization. But I'm going to touch on something for just one moment, which is, should we be paying employees to do some of this work? And my answer is, in almost all cases, yes. And so people say, well, how do I do that if we're not raising money? And the reality is, when you set your mission, it's very important to think about what your mission is and how you're going to achieve that mission, and how paid staff is involved in achieving that mission and what that looks like. Is that part-time paid staff? Is it in the beginning just contracted paid staff? And how you're going to raise money coming out of the gate of starting your organization to be able to support paid staff. There's amazing best practices out there to be able to do that. I did not invent any of them. People much, much smarter than me invented them. And so we can use some of those models to help move organizations forward to actually creating staff, which is a very, very important part of the sustainability of the organization. Now, I'm going to give this over to Amanda, I believe, next. And because I think we each have about 8 minutes to speak, and I don't want to take too much time, but I did include some resources here as well. And in those resources, I put the Nonprofit Leadership Center. Full disclosure, my old stomping ground is the Nonprofit Leadership Center. I worked there for several years as a strategic solutions director. They are a great resource for nonprofit startup to long-range sustainability and strategic planning. The Nonprofit AF website is a great resource as well. Voulet has a really funny take on how we as nonprofit professionals can really sustain our organizations. And it's kind of fun, levity, but really chock full of great ideas and information. The Nonprofit Leadership Lab is another great resource, National Council of Nonprofits, Board Source, also within your states and even your regional or global regions. You will have nonprofit councils like the Wisconsin Council of Nonprofits, California Council of Nonprofits, that can help you through this transition and sustainability process as well. I hear a lot of you probably sighing and saying, oh, that's consultants, oh, that's people bringing in, experts cost money, and they do. So when we think about sustainability, we think about what we're going to make that monetary investment to, and that human capital, that intellectual capital that we need to create that sustainability is very, very important. Of course, as you know, we all already have this wonderful part in our hearts, which is that we are connected to the mission. And so that's a great starting place. And as I said, because you all are here, it's a great starting place as well. It means you know that sustainability is important to your organization. And even though many of us are parents like myself or family members like myself who started these organizations to really meet the need of patients whom our children are experiencing the fellow diagnosis with, it doesn't change the fact that we really do need to focus on this sustainability. So I'm going to pass over to Amanda. I'm excited to listen to the rest of the panelists and answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Tuesday. We're just going to prep the slides for our next speaker who is actually going to be Melissa Bryce Gamble, who is the executive director and co-founder of the GFPD, which is short for the Global Foundation for Paroxysmal Disorders. And so we are excited to have Melissa here to share her insights in developing your advocacy organization. So without any further ado, Melissa, I can see your screen, so I think we're in business. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Tuesday, for that awesome presentation. It flows directly into what I'm going to be sharing with you about today, which is building our organization from the ground up and focusing on the people, focusing on the board and how we use our board to help propel our mission for research, for education, for advocacy, and finally for hope, for giving hope to those families that are impacted by paroxysmal diseases. So I am the executive director of the Global Foundation for Paroxysmal Disorders. Our mission is to improve the lives of individuals that are living with a paroxysmal disorder by funding research, championing scientific collaboration, and empowering families and professionals through educational programs and support services. We revisit our mission statement every 3 years or so, just to make sure that we're on track, that we're inclusive, that as more paroxysmal disorders are being discovered, that we are always keeping that in mind and bringing those new families in. So we've moved from, very specific language of paroxysmal biogenesis disorder, Zellweger spectrum disorder, to more broad language of we want to support all individuals with paroxysmal disorders. My slide's not moving now. One moment. Here we go. Okay, so about the Global Foundation for Paroxysmal Disorders. We were founded in 2010 as a 501c3 nonprofit public charity. Many of the resources that Tuesday mentioned, Board Source, the National Council on Nonprofits, those are resources that we have dug deep into and utilized throughout the last several years as we have worked to really grow from that infant stage of a nonprofit to more, being a little more advanced, to being able to have more programs and really use the people on our staff, on our board to help us move our mission forward. So a few of the things we do, I've already mentioned this. We fund and promote research. We organize family and scientific conferences. We are having one in 2022. We just signed the hotel contract for that this weekend, and really hoping that we'll be able to do that in person in 2022. We also facilitate online support groups. We have an equipment exchange program. We work with patients and physicians on education and advocacy. And then, one of the main things that I'm going to be speaking about today is our board, and really diving in and working on board development so that you can have the best support for the organization as possible. Tuesday mentioned, paid staff. Yes, that is hugely important. Your board is another piece of that. And then we also have a medical and scientific advisory board. So the board, this is one of my favorite topics to speak on. And one thing that I think has really helped move us to a new level. So we were incorporated in 2010. And at that time, we had 7 parents that all had children with a paroxysmal disorder that wanted to be involved in the forming of this foundation. And so we took what we had. We had 7 motivated parents, all with living or deceased children at that point, and said, okay, now we have a board. Except we didn't really know what a board was supposed to do. And so for the first 5 years of our organization, we really didn't have any board turnover. We didn't have any changes in terms of who was doing what role on the board. We also didn't have any diversity. And so it really felt like for those first 5 years as we were getting going, same ideas over and over again, same people executing the same ideas. And at that point, we didn't even have staff. So our board was a working board, which is a difficult thing as well when you're trying to get a small organization up and going. So one of the things that we really honed in on was in 2015 and 2016 that we really needed to look at our bylaws that we adopted in 2010. We needed to look at those and say, are we following those bylaws? Are we having quarterly meetings? Are we reviewing our financial information on a quarterly basis, which is what the IRS requires? And so just having that realization 5 years in was a little startling, because we had just sort of, as Tuesday said, we got the cart before the horse a lot. And so 2015, 2016, we started to look at those things to help make us better, to help build our board out, to help understand what does a board do. So we redid our bylaws completely. We looked at positions, and we started rotating through officer positions on a yearly basis. And then we started really being transparent about our board recruitment policies and recruiting more board members. So part of that, then was moving from a working board to a governing board, and the addition of staff and how that dynamic sort of works with a small grassroots organization. So we had to come up with some rules and guidelines for our board of directors. You've got to attend a certain number of meetings annually to be considered a board member in good standing. We want you to come to our conference if you're financially able to. We want, every board member to give and to get some of, and help us with the financial piece of this organization. And then finally, recruitment. So again, as I mentioned, for the first 5 years of our organization, we only had the same 7 board members. In the last 6 or 7 years, we have had a lot of new board members, and we've used a tool called a board matrix to help us recruit. And that should be on my next slide, and we'll see if I can get it to roll over here. Yay. So we started using a board matrix about 4 or 5 years ago to see really where are the holes in expertise, in age, in affiliation, in race and ethnicity. And what we found, and something that we are still working on, is that we are a very homogenous board. And that has, led to us perhaps not being as diverse in our programming and in our marketing as we should be. So we began sort of working on this at the end of 2019 before COVID hit, before 2020 happened, and everybody was looking at their organization and their DEI policies. And we really pulled out our board matrix in 2019 and said, whoa, we've got to get some over 65-year-olds. We've got to get some people in the 51 to 65 category age range. We tend to be pretty evenly split, males and females, but also race and ethnicity that was a struggle, and it has been for us. So we are doing a number of different things to get that leadership potential built up, so that we can have some more diversity on our board, and have our board actually look like what our patient population looks like. Finally, one of the things that really limited us in the first 5 years of our organization was that we had only parents on the board. So what that meant is that we did not have some areas of expertise that any nonprofit needs. So any nonprofit is going to need somebody that has some legal experience. Any nonprofit is going to need somebody that has financial experience, someone that has experience in fundraising. And so those are the pieces that we really started to look outside of our families and really try to find, okay, who are some people that maybe, right, not in that first circle of influence of families, but maybe friends of families that could participate on the board and help fill some of these needs, or, beyond that, grandparents, aunts, uncles, community leaders in areas where we have fundraisers. So when we changed our perspective on what the board does and what the board needs to do and what the organization needs the board to do, we really found that we had a much more robust conversation on our board meetings. We had different perspectives being raised during each board meeting. We had better ideas, because it wasn't just an echo chamber of everyone kind of having the same perspective and saying the same things. So I really think that is one of our biggest wins, is just really diversifying our board so that we have not only families of patients that are affected by paroxysmal disorders, but also community leaders, folks that have business experience. And, that has allowed us to really move our programs ahead. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So our organization has just grown in a huge way since 2010, when we were started. We've grown from 48 families on our patient registry to over 600 families now on our patient registry in 39 countries around the world. So those diverse board members are helping us think about, okay, how are some ways that we can reach out to other communities? So with that, the board has helped us really push ahead our scientific initiatives. So our board has a committee that directs our scientific grants program. We have an annual process for that. Our board helps us, look at how can we network better to get scientific work done for free. And they also help direct some of the programming for our Family and Scientific Conference that is held biennially. So beyond the science, we have added another layer to our programming in the past 2 years. So that layer is advocacy. And we celebrate Rare Disease Day and Week each year. We have board members come. The pictures that you're seeing here are several board members in attendance there. And we also have our annual Awareness Day that we host every October. That's coming up on October 5th, 2021. And then finally, our board helps the organization look at what legislative or advocacy kind of initiatives can really help push the mission of our organization forward. So for us, that's increased NIH funding and FDA funding and funding for the CDC. So we really want to see that funding stay at a stable level, or go up. And then another piece of that advocacy work is newborn screening legislation. Our organization feels that it's really, really important to be finding these families and helping get earlier diagnoses. And then finally, working for advocacy for the Cogswell-Macy Act, which is something that we've been a longtime supporter of. And that act is focused on providing deafblind interveners for students that need them in the school systems. So advocacy is, something that our board helps us push. And then finally, our family support initiatives. So I think it's really important that the board have a good sense for what are the needs of the families. What are the needs of the patients? What are the needs of the caregivers? And so to that end, we do some pretty extensive surveying of our families and caregivers and patients. We provide those results to the board at the end of the year as we are planning for programming in the next year. So we're just starting that process for 2022, which is hard to believe. And we want to make sure that the board, now that our board is more diverse, now that our board has, people that are not only affected by this disorder, but community leaders, legal professionals, we want to make sure that they are aware of the needs of the families so that we can really be supporting them well. So some of the things that our board has chosen as real important pieces for us to be working on are our regional meetups. Our board is very in tune with making sure that we have regional meetups on non-pandemic years. So we have missed regional meetups for the last 18 months, unfortunately, due to the pandemic. But we're really hoping that in 2022, in June, we'll be able to have a full family and scientific conference, even though we haven't had regional meetups as of late. Our board is always interested in knowing what kinds of webinars and virtual roundtables we're hosting for our families. Those program topics, they love to know about those. And then finally, pushing and helping the organization with our public face. So our website is something that I feel like is always changing, that, I will get a text or a call from a board member, hey, I was looking at the website and I think this needs to be updated, or don't we have something new about this research program that we could add to the website? So that is those are the kinds of things that our board members are able to be involved in. And when they really have, when we have a diverse board, we have a board that is not only caregivers or patients, some of those other board members are able to really hop in and say, oh, hey, I'm seeing this. Is this a need that our organization has? Or I've been on a board before, they did this with their website. Is that something we should be thinking about? So using the board and their skills and is really key to getting the best results in our programs and our fundraising. And I'm gonna hit my next slide. And that's all I have for my first set of slides. I think we'll be going back to Ben.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was an excellent talk, and your matrix on diversity and the makeup of a board was an especially popular topic of conversation in the comments. And so I think we're going to follow up with Melissa afterwards and see if that's something that she would be willing to share as a resource for the community overall, because especially thinking about diversity in these sorts of situations, making sure that you've got a lot of different points of view on that board is very important. So for those of you who asked questions about that, we'll follow up with Melissa and hopefully be able to share that out to the wider audience. On to the next talk. We've got with us today Amanda Moore, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. And Amanda, looks like you are ready to rock and roll, so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I think it's incredibly important when you're working in the rare advocacy space to understand the benefits and understand the tools behind nonprofit organizations, as well as how sustainability needs to play a really big role in that. I think first and foremost, it's important for me to tell you the reason why I'm actually here. My son, as you can see, if you're looking at the presentation online, this is my son, Jackson, who was diagnosed with Angelman syndrome at 2.5. And so from, a week or two after diagnosis, I kind of pulled myself off the floor and said, what can I do? What do I need to do? I need to do something. And within a month of diagnosis, I was on the board at Angelman Syndrome Foundation. And now luckily I get to support the foundation in a CEO perspective. So if you want to go ahead and move the slide, and we're going to talk a little bit today about when it comes to sustainability, how incredibly important it is around building bridges in collaboration. So this is just the mission of the organization. We can go to the next slide and to get to the meat of it. I'm just going to share with you a few case studies that kind of apply to our foundation that may help others when we're talking about building bridges and collaboration in rare diseases. When I started this position, almost 3 years ago, the one thing that I noticed was how the rare disease world tends to be very siloed, and even within the rare disease, your specific rare disease. For us, we had multiple Angelman syndrome foundations across the world serving our community. And what I found was a lot of them just weren't talking with each other. And I find that this is very common for the rare disease space, that you have multiple organizations working to support the community. But what does that look like when it comes to working together, and how detrimental that can be when you're working against each other? And so one of the case studies I just want to share with you around the importance of collaboration is when I came on, we had already had a clinic network that we thought was a really great and strong network, but we were really having trouble expanding that network for several reasons. One, it all comes down to dollars sometimes, of being able to have the dollars to be able to do the work that you want to do. And with multiple organizations in the space, fundraising can sometimes be a little difficult because you have multiple organizations competing for family dollars or competing for different dollars. And so what we did as a board was kind of take a look at the people around us, the people that understood the lens that we were looking through and understood the importance of really collaborating and really building bridges so we can all work together as one. And we noticed that there were other 15Q rare diseases that were doing clinic networks as well. So we immediately reached out to Duke 15Q and said, hey, we really feel like all of our clinicians are seeing 15Q patients, and your clinicians are seeing Angelman patients. What would it look like for us to combine our clinic networks, work together, so one, we can sustain this idea of clinics for excellent clinical care for our kids across the world. And they loved the idea. And so what we did was overnight went from 8 clinics to about 21 clinics, just by combining our clinic networks and working together and mending some of those bridges, and really working on how we communicate with each other and how we work together to serve these populations. One of the great things about this when it comes to sustainability as well is we have a shared budget. So if I were to try to bring on 21 clinics on my own through my budget, it would have never happened. But being able to share that burden and be able to work and collaborate has allowed us to really work super hard on expanding our clinical network. So that's one example. I could go on for days on how that all started. And there's always some challenges in between, especially when you're working with other organizations, or you're working, when you're working and you have only your organization's best intent or best outlook in mind, and you're not looking at the bigger picture. It can sometimes be challenging, but it has, in all reality, been incredibly rewarding. One of the other examples I wanted to share and talk about was this idea of duplication of efforts within the same disease state. So we found this as well. We found that because everyone was very, very kept their data, on their side, they didn't want to share data, get data out. We felt it would be really important to try to bring together all of the Angelman partners, all the Angelman different organizations, and create basically a database where it can be of data syndrome to connect to all of these data points that were all over the place, and have a place where they can all meet in one and be able to share with researchers, clinicians, families to expedite treatment. For a long time, when we talk about registries, whether it's natural history study, other registries, or even ladder, what we have now, there was always a lot of competition, once again, on whose families are, who is entering into our database or another organization's database. And what we found was it was really, really essential for us to all come to the table and say, okay, what's best for the community right now? And if what's best for the community is for us to come together and work more together on some of these larger topics, then that's the right thing to do. We have to kind of put egos aside and say, at the end of the day, if this is going to get us to treatment quicker, then that's what we need to do. And so the database and the clinic network all kind of sit within the same kind of structure, as far as that database is collecting data that's in these clinics, and it's collecting data on both Duke 15Q patients as well as the Angelman syndrome patients. So that's another example of, being able to basically start the conversation, put out a reaching hand and say, I really want to do this. I think it would be perfect for us to come together, and seeing the outcome that comes out of that has been absolutely beautiful and wonderful for our organization. Another thing I want to bring up as a case study is within the Angelman syndrome space, like I said, we have multiple organizations working towards different goals within the community. There has been history of these organizations not working together and working a lot into a silo. And when I came on, I noticed that, and it concerned me because, one, when you're not willing to come together and work within your same community with the same goal as far as the community serve of being Angelman syndrome, it makes it really, really challenging to not duplicate efforts and to spend money on things that money's already been spent, and to understand all that's out there to ensure that we aren't duplicating efforts. Because if we keep duplicating efforts, it's going to be really hard on our budget, and it's going to be really hard to sustain. So how can we start having conversations with all these different Angelman groups and say, this is really what you excel at. We'll stay out of that space and we'll really push our families towards you for this. Or you are really strong in this research aspect. We are not as strong in that. So we're going to allow you to do, not allow, we want you to do that and really hone in on that. And, and then whatever your group may be strong at. So everyone's kind of working together, and that there's not this mass confusion in the community about who does what. I know within our community for so long, so many people got the organizations mixed up. They didn't really know who was doing what. And it got really complicated. I mean, having a child with a rare disease, it's heavy already. And then you get into a smaller rare disease community. Sometimes that can be challenging when you don't have organizations working together and you don't have people working together to support families in the best way possible. So those are a few. You can go to the next slide, Anne. These are just a few examples of different case studies. I can obviously go through a lot more, but none of that would have happened without this idea of building bridges and collaboration. Just 5 kind of things to remember that I wanted to bring up. 1, collaboration is key. Even when it's hard, working toward that will add value to your organization that you can't imagine. Like I said, there has been so many growing pains with the multiple people we collaborate here with at the foundation now. But because of that, our community is better. Our community is growing. We're able to do more services for our families because we are collaborating. So always think, when you're thinking of new programs, when you're thinking about new research or whatever, always think, who else is doing this and how can we work with them? And then always foster a positive community. Positive attitude creates more positivity. I know that the one thing that's really hard for our community sometimes can be social media. So how do we make sure that, from your perspective, from what you can have control over, that you're constantly fostering this positive community, that you're not bringing each other down, that you're lifting up other organizations for the work that they're doing, and vice versa. But always positivity, always creates, that attitude will create positivity. And, my mom taught me growing up, just kill them with kindness. So if there has been a difficult partnership or if there has been difficult work, I just keep thinking, I'm just going to kill them with kindness and win them over as much as I possibly can. And then build bridges, not fences. Don't be the person who always is putting up that fence. Work on building a bridge, even though it may take away something from your organization as far as maybe recognition, dollars, or whatever. It's really, really important to keep the end goal and your mission in mind. And if it's not your organization that 100% gets you to that finish line, it might be a group of organizations working. At the end of the day, it makes it get there much quicker. So it's incredibly important that you always come to the table with an open mind to build that bridge and not to pick the fence up. Always listen to your community. Sometimes we get blinded by the lenses we are used to. I know the last talk, she was talking about how her whole board was a board of parents. It's so lovely that they take their time to be board members, but sometimes the challenge can be, we see through one lens, and that's the lens of, I'm a parent of a child with Angelman syndrome. So sometimes it's really hard to see past that. So really listen to your community and let them tell you what they need and really try to hone in on what that is. And then at the end of the day, you be the leader that creates those bridges. You go out there and you start a movement to where you're working and you're collaborating, because at the end of the day, the more you build the bridges, the more you collaborate, the longer you'll be able to sustain your organization. If you collaborate and you're in a pinch, all those people you work with are going to support you. If you collaborate and you want to expand your programs, it's all about collaborating, and then you have some shared costs maybe, and then it equals back up to sustainability. So there's so many opportunities and it's the one thing that honestly has disheartened me a little bit in the rare disease community, to see how there's a lot of different rare disease organizations that are serving the same population that aren't necessarily talking to each other. And there may be some history there. I know there was for us. but it's looking ahead and saying, what can I do to build this bridge and how can I move forward? So I think I'm about ready to run out of time. So there's Ben, but I think that was the last slide. And yeah, so thank you so much. I look forward to answering any questions you all may have.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was an awesome presentation. I love the bit about collaboration. That's incredibly essential, and just a shameless plug for our lovely sponsors, Global Genes. The Global Genes Foundation Alliance is an excellent place to find advice and collaborative support within the rare disease community from other people who are going through a very similar thing that you are. So
absolutely.
that's awesome.
And I didn't bring that up, but you're right. There's so many different networks out there. Anytime I need something, I'll shoot an email out to one of my networks and say, does anyone have this? And 99.9% of the time they do. So I don't have to recreate it. I can just borrow it for our community. So absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, most of the nuts have been cracked. So make use of everyone else. So I want to move on to our next great speaker. Our final speaker today is Tremene Lamy, the Senior Director of Programs and Advocacy for Community Catalyst. And we're excited to see her. It looks like her slides are ready to go. And there she is on screen. So Tremene, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ben. First, I just want to thank all of the speakers that are here today and everyone that is listening for this great opportunity to come before you. I'm going to try to tie in a couple of things that were said throughout the conversation, because I think that it all loops and it all works perfectly together. So this is the title screen that you'll see, but I really want us to just talk through this. Afterwards, I can definitely share any additional slides and information that you may want. One of the things that Amanda brought up in the last presentation was the important that collaboration is key. The work that I do at Community Catalyst is really centered on power building, community power building, and how community partnerships, relationships, authentic relationships that are built on trust are key really to the work that we do moving forward. And what does that mean, community power building? What does it really look like? Well, one, it looks like having those authentic relationships where you have your partners that are really influential in the decision-making process. It means having partners as key stakeholders and moving away from the sense of urgency that we have to have a token rep from this and a token rep from that. But what does it mean for people to really meaningfully contribute to a conversation or discussion and really have authentic relationships that go beyond any particular project, any particular funding, where you can kind of really seriously think about the work and what the work means and what's needed in order to really have long-term impact within the community. So in this conversation, I really wanted to dig deeper on how we can approach power building in a way that also helps us to think differently about how we're measuring or looking at impact. I read this really interesting article the other day, and one of the things that we're talking about was like, we really have to move away from evaluation and assessment and asking what's the impact and what's the impact. And my initial response was like, oh my God, what do you mean? That's how I situate my work, where I'm always thinking about impact. But when I read a little deeper, what they were really talking about was, we want to look at impact as far as progress. How are we looking at the progress that people are making, that the organization is making, that our partners are making to actually impact change when it comes to the work, right? And how is it not an afterthought? How is it actually included in the work that we're doing? A lot of times when people think about impact and measuring impact, it really kind of falls into kind of two core bucket areas. One, where you're really looking at impact because maybe a donor says, hey, what are your milestones? What are your benchmarks? How are you evaluating the success of your program? The other, maybe it's a new organization that's starting out, and maybe you develop a strategic plan. And in that plan, you have priorities, you have benchmarks, you have goals, you have objectives, you have quote unquote key performance indicators. But really, what does all of that mean to measuring impact on a day-to-day basis? And that's what I really want to focus on for the next couple of minutes. It looks, I think of us all having a research practitioner hat. I always say I'm not just a practitioner working in the field, in the community, but I'm also a researcher. And to wear both hats, that means that impact, think of impact, thinking about progress. It's constantly embedded in all of the programming that is taking place. So whether you're holding a special event and you're using social media like Facebook and so on and so forth to track engagement, how people are engaging or responding to an event. Maybe you're doing Eventbrite and you're checking attendance that way. Or maybe it's, hey, we had this great event, and during the event, we gave presentations, and in those presentations, there were these cool polls asking people for their feedback on particular things. All of that is really interesting ways to kind of think about measuring impact in a way that is sustainable, that doesn't seem overwhelming to staff, but will actually help you to shape and evolve your program as you go along. And so I think it's really, really critical to think about, one, what, as an organization, what am I offering? What are we doing? How is what are we doing linked to our mission, our vision, our purpose? And then when we think about the vision, a long-term approach, what are the benchmarks? What are the milestones that have to be accomplished as we go along in order to make sure that our programs, our organization is successful? And how do we embed within the everyday work that we're doing interesting ways for our staff not to feel overwhelmed, especially when you're starting off and you have a small staff. I've been there, trust me. Or you don't want also the people that are participating and being a part of the program to be overwhelmed by the process either. So you do cool things like, one, if you're doing community power building, when you have conversations, you're thinking about that as also being focus group discussions, right? And you're also measuring and keeping note of all those conversations as well. And you're using every opportunity that may present itself to collect data, to do it in a meaningful way that is reflective. It doesn't just end up in a report to donors at the end of a conversation when you have to do a final report at the end of the year. It doesn't just end up in an assessment tool and now it's sitting on a shelf somewhere and you say, yeah, we did that years ago and now we have this to show for it. But it's in that everyday movement, motions that you're doing within everyday programming, evaluation, and assessment is embedded in it. You're constantly looking at these as opportunities to capture a snapshot of the work, of where the impact level is at that particular point, and to think, okay, what are our next milestones to progress, to making sure that systemic change is happening in a meaningful, authentic way, and that all of the parties, the key partners, the key stakeholders that represent your organization or that partner with your organization are key and influential to that process. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ben.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tremene. That was awesome. Everyone, welcome back to our session. I hope you all had a good stretch break, refilled your water glasses or got your coffee or whatever you needed. We are rejoined by all of our speakers today here to serve on a Q&A panel. And so the boxes to the, I believe, left of your screen, like I mentioned at the top of the talk, are available for you to ask questions. We do have some questions in there now that we'll start with, but by all means, please continue to enter those and we will address them as we have time. So I think the first question to start with, and this is for everyone, is more of a good overarching question that came in from Sue Hagen from the National Ataxia Foundation. An excellent question that I think is pertinent to all organizations. What questions do organizations need to ask themselves to know whether or not they have succeeded as they have built out their strategy for growth and for collaboration?
I think a couple things that you can ask yourself, these are things that I ask myself now and almost every day, is one, do I now have an engaged board? And you have to define what engage means for you. But a successful foundation sometimes depends on having a really successful board. So I think it's really, is my board engaged? I think the other thing that, and I don't know if this is not so much a question, but I think a danger within the community is that if you're not working right now on succession planning, so making sure that you are talking with your board, talking staff, talking with your scientists, your clinicians. We've just had this happen to where we have a mass amount of clinicians retiring. And so if you don't plan ahead of time of succession, the question you might be answered is, how much longer can we stay open, right? So, do I have a succession plan for the crucial stakeholders in our organization? Is my board engaged? And, I also say at the end of the day, like, if I only have a few points on the surveys that go out to families, and for the most part, our families feel supported, then we're good. But those are a couple things that come to mind.
Melissa, you talked a little bit about, the changing up the dynamics of the board and, the makeup of the board over things. And I think one of the elements that calls to mind is that patient advocacy organizations evolve over time, and that, they start kind of small with usually a group of affected individuals, family members, people who care, that are just trying to beat a drum and get people to pay attention. And as they gain traction, needs change. And so maybe you could speak a little bit to what kinds of questions, you mentioned, I think in your talk, that you revisit your mission statement every 3 years. So, going back to those essential elements of the design of your organization, what kind of questions do you all ask yourselves to see how successful you've been? And then as you evolve, I'm sure those questions change. So how do they change? Maybe you could give us a little insight into that.
It's a great question, Ben. And, one of the things that we do, as I mentioned, is reevaluate that mission statement every 3 years. And so when we do that, we're looking at, okay, are we being inclusive? Are we including all of the paroxysmal disorders that need us right now? And so one of the things that we've found over the last 5 or 6 years is that with the emergence of whole exome and whole genome sequencing, we're finding new families all the time, and they're finding us. And we are finding new mutations that can cause paroxysmal disorders, truly new people in, in categories of paroxysmal disorders that we really didn't think were there at the beginning of our organization. Yeah. So in terms of making sure that we are serving the needs of our population, being inclusive, welcoming all those people in, giving them a home, a safe place to land where they can feel supported. But what that has also meant is that our programming needs have expanded because the needs of those patients are different. So that has really caused us to just kind of constantly reevaluate, okay, are we doing enough in the education sphere? Do we need to reevaluate the advocacy programs that we're undertaking? Are they relevant for our families and for our patients? Just yesterday, there was a sign-on letter for paid leave for caregivers that we have been, advocating for. And then one of the organizations sent out a social media toolkit. We decided not to use that social media toolkit because it wasn't actually targeted to our audience and to our families. So making sure that even if you are supporting something, when you're asking for support from your community, that the messaging that you're sending out is targeted and is supportive of those families in that position. And then, finally, I would say just that constant resurveying of families and patients, and resurveying of what their needs are. And then, Ben, if I could, I would go ahead and address your question about kind of getting that broader community looped in. So that has been a big challenge for us because we are a rare disease. But what we found is that if we can get some small small events going in regional areas around the country in the US where, and in Canada, we've had some good luck in Canada and the UK as well, where we can sort of build some regional hubs, those around events that perhaps our families or patients or caregivers are hosting, awareness events, small fundraising events. Those events have been really great in sort of providing a funnel so that we can have new members on committees from those regional hubs. So anytime I speak at one of those smaller regional events, I always put a call out for new committee members, new board members, and just really, trying to spread the word that this work can't be done by just a small group of people. The more participation and involvement that you have from a wide variety of stakeholders, people that support, patients, friends and family, the better outcomes you're going to have when it comes to seeing progress on your programs and fundraising.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Tremene, I saw you had your hand raised. I think that you had, you have some insight from, board strategic planning perspective. What do you think are some pertinent questions that taking strategic plans and then looking back maybe a few years later, 3-5 years later, what questions do you ask?
So one of the things I think is really important is that there's a 3 or a 5 year strategic plan that's in place that doesn't sit on a shelf, right? That you're constantly looking back each year on a quarterly basis as well, and kind of saying, okay, where are our milestones? What are we looking to accomplish in 6 months, and 12 months, and 18 months, and 24 months? And where are we on our quest to get there, right? But also being really open and flexible to the process, right? The work is evolving and shifting and changing, and you don't want your strategic plan to lock you in to going in one direction if there are other things that come up that shift the direction. But definitely using it as an opportunity to kind of check the pulse of the organization, check the pulse of the community, and be open and reflective and responsive to not only the key stakeholders who are your community partners and organizations, but the community in which you're serving, right? So I always say, like I said, I love having focus groups. I love having listening tours and using those as opportunities to think about impact, to think about what the need is. And where the direction of the work should go moving forward, and to always go back to the strategic plan and say, hey, you know what, we need to change things up a little bit. We need to make sure that we're more responsive here and more reflective here, and that we're thinking strategically about our next steps and making moves that we feel that are going to be impactful.
A mentor of mine once said that every strategic plan should also have an accountability plan, and you have to have some sort of a way that you're going to measure yourself along a roadmap, because time's going to march on, and that's a given. But are you actually doing what you said you were going to do? So
the best ones have key performance indicators embedded in them.
Yep.
Great.
Ben, can I add one piece?
Absolutely.
In terms of our strategic planning, one thing we have done is include those key performance indicators in a report to our board every month. So our board knows what our strategic plan says. We have those scorecard metrics that we track on a month-to-month basis, so that they see, okay, we're having this many number of families attend a virtual event in the month of June or whatever it is. And so they are really seeing those and making those metrics visual and quick for them to understand is, I think, really important.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to move on to the next question. This has been a really good discussion. I think we could probably talk about it all day, but we do have some specific questions directed at some of you individually, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond. So first question is for Tuesday. This is from Jenny Gunkel. And she's wondering if you'd be willing to expand upon some of your statements around use of paid staff almost exclusively, especially when you're thinking about cash-strapped young organizations that don't have money to pay people.
So I love this question. And I'm going to start by saying you would never want your organization to be run exclusively by paid staff. So I want to preface that first. Second, I want to say, and I'm saying this in the nicest possible way, we are all running small businesses here. These are small, mini corporations. They operate like any other business, and they should adhere to the same processes as any other business. And in fact, we even have regulatory constraints around us that are sometimes stricter than most other for-profit businesses. If we were opening an ice cream store, right, and we loved ice cream and we were so passionate about ice cream, we would never go out and say, hey, I'm operating an ice cream store at the corner of 35th and 2nd, and I'm looking for people to come and give their time to serve ice cream whenever they have free time. And then when we sell $1,000 in ice cream, we would never say, hey, you know, everybody loved strawberries so much. I'm going to take that $1,000 and keep asking people to donate their time to serve ice cream, and I'm going to make strawberry even better, right? And so my point in this is, in sharing this weird analogy, is that we aren't serving ice cream. We're actually saving lives. We're doing something way more significant, important, and life-changing than serving ice cream. So when you start a nonprofit, just like somebody who's selling ice cream, you would create a business plan, and that business plan would have a strategy for you to develop staff. And I get it. I'll share with you our personal experience. We started our organization 20 years ago. We had many wonderful parents on the board who were a working board, and they were doing this work and they were doing fundraisers. But something that we did that was very, very smart is we stopped and we said, okay, where is the overlap in what we're doing happening? Let's look at this Venn diagram. And in that Venn diagram, we found that all the volunteer work that was doing, most of it overlapped right around conference, our international medical conference. That's where so much of our volunteer overlap was. And we recognized that that volunteer overlap right there, what we could do with that is we could hire somebody, contract, to come in and do the conference. And so we actually bumped up our cost to attend conference just a little bit that year to be able to pay a contract person to run that conference. She ran that conference. She did an amazing job. She was a parent. We actually paid a parent. And we found that she really had the skills to be an executive director, or to be the first executive director that we hired. So we went back, we did an assessment on what an executive director should be paid. Didn't put the cart before the horse. We didn't say to her, what are you willing to make? We said, what is an acceptable, livable wage for the work that you do? And we came back, we decided what she should be paid, and she was paid as our first part-time executive director. And when we, much like all of you, when we first had our first fundraisers, we'd have these fundraisers and we'd say, this is great, we raised $10,000. Let's put it all into research. No. What we learned very quickly is that $10,000 needed to be put into that business plan to stabilize our organization. Because here's the thing, you can raise $1 million for research, but if you don't have someone who is dedicated operationally to sit there and manage that research, make sure that the researchers are hitting benchmarks, making sure that you're doing the reporting that you need to be doing, and you're managing the operations of the organization in the best way, you won't be doing research for very long. And that's why staff is so important to the operational mission of the organization. So yes, should you go out and run out and hire staff tomorrow? Should you take out a bank loan? These are certainly things I am not advising in any way. But I'm saying you have to restructure just like any business would that's selling ice cream or anything else, like a business, to decide that you're going to bring in the paid operational structures in place that you can maintain the organization long term.
Can I add something to that? I think it's really one thing that we've struggled with as a community is you have to be very sensitive to your families when you do bring on staff, because there is a lack of understanding and knowledge sometimes when it comes to, this is a business, this is a nonprofit, we're working to sustain it so we can continue supporting you. But when I know, at least for our community, when we bring on new staff, there's a little sense of like, well, that all that money could go to finding a cure. Like you're spending money on staff and not on like actually doing what we want you to do. And so there has to be a lot of transparency, but education when it comes to, at least on our perspective, bringing on staff. And I think it's good. I think it's good to educate the community. This is why we're doing it. This is going to be the outcome of that, because at least from us, we would get a lot of pushback for that. And but also to bring back simply to the fact of, I think within a nonprofit, you don't want your admin cost to be more than 10% of is it 10% or something like that of your overall cost?
25.
So yeah, okay. What is it now?
25.
25.
Yeah.
So so that's the way we always describe it as well. Like all the professional fundraiser people say, as long as we're under this number, that's smart business for a nonprofit. So I would just caution, if you're going to bring on staff, as long as you're transparent and can explain it to your community, and you owe it to them, at least if a large percentage of your fundraising is coming from parents going out there and doing golf outings, doing walks, doing cook-offs, whatever it may be, they want to know where their money's going and why.
Mm-hmm. And I think if I could add on to that, Amanda, when we file our 990 every year, and when we do our audit for our financial statements, which is something that, we didn't start doing until year 5-ish of our organization, we allocate staff salaries, even if it's an admin position. So you can allocate that staff salary to program expense, which helps with that general and administrative category of your budget.
Absolutely.
And I think is an important thing in messaging to donors. Our admin staff they're not just making Word documents. They're making Word documents about things that are important. They're helping put slides together for presentations that are being done, by family members or by scientific advisory board members, things of that nature, so that you can really show those program expenses, and not just, oh gosh, our general and administrative is way too high. So 80% of my salary is allocated to programs right now, because I do a lot of program work. The other 20% is that sort of regulatory piece and financial piece that I work on with our CFO.
Both very, very good points, Amanda and Melissa. So thank you for adding on to that. And I think, you're exactly right. I mean, what we do is programmatic. It is absolutely, and it is all about communication. And those communication strategies usually are better bolstered when you have staff who can dedicate time to
absolutely
communication strategies, right? And also, we, again, going back to kind of the business versus, nonprofit as a business is, we really expect that when we give $30,000 to research, that $30,000 is going absolutely as far as it can. And we wouldn't expect people in a for-profit environment to make those things happen just out of thin air, right? We know that there are people behind making those things happen. And so being able to allocate how those things happen is really key. And even, allocating your staff to the appropriate programs is really key. Most of the work we do is programmatic, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent points. A great way to address the question. And I especially like the points about being transparent with donors and understanding exactly how those things get broken down. The next question is also from Jenny. Great participation, Jenny. Thank you.
Love it, Jenny.
This one's directed towards Melissa. So how did you go about getting interest in community members or people who are not parents within your community in joining your board? And then how did you get them to stay involved? So, I think she's talking really about the scientists, the business people, the lawyers, the folks that have the expertise in other areas that isn't super garden variety.
Right. So, such a great question. And again, I mentioned this a few minutes ago. We sort of use those regional events as hubs to kind of build out our committees. But the thing that has been most impactful has been once we have new committee members or new board members that are sort of community driven, that are those other pieces, those legal folks, the financial folks, the HR folks. The best tool that we have found in keeping them hooked is to get them to a conference, to get them to meet our families in person. Come sit down, be at our conference. Usually our conferences are in DC. Next year, our conference will be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So, we're already prepping our board for travel for that, because we want them to be there. With as rare as rare is, I just really think it's important to have that human connection. And I'm hopeful we'll be in person next year so that we can make that happen. And our board members that aren't directly impacted can really see the work that we do and the families that we help, like see them, touch them, talk to them, get an idea from them about what's important. So, the pandemic's put a bit of a damper on that, unfortunately. We're trying to do some of that virtually, but I really think, if you are hosting in-person events, whether they're small regional meetups for families or something in the way of a family and scientific conference, the best investment you can make in having your board be really plugged in and engaged is having them at that conference.
I think something to add to that too is one thing that we did from the very beginning was we did basically a gap analysis of our board. So what are the positions or the expertise that we need? And then searching for board members based on that. And what I agree, we really needed some individuals on our board that weren't directly, taking care of an individual with Angelman syndrome. So we actually looked out even outside. We have an uncle, we have a college roommate, we have people who fit the needs of that gap analysis. Even with your pharmaceutical companies you work with, like there are people out there that would fill the need. You just have to sit down with your board. It's a great board recruitment exercise. Sit down with your board and say, what are we missing? What are the things we're missing? And then start getting to work on filling in those specific areas. And keeping them engaged it's all about utilizing their expertise. If you need someone who is super good at building a case statement and that's what they're good at and that's what they want to do, let them do that and, take that over, because that's going to keep them engaged because it's something that they really enjoy doing and that they feel like they add value to. So it's all about really cultivating and getting to know these individuals and getting to know your organization and realizing we really need someone in the health insurance area right now for our board. So if anybody's out there that really is good with health insurance or all that stuff, let me know. But in knowing that and then going out and searching for that, I think is a good way. And Melissa put up, I think it was Melissa or Tuesday, put up a slide of resources. Like Board Source is my place to go. They have great board matrix. They're just great. They're wonderful and they have great resources. So that's always a good place to go. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. It's really important to perform a gap analysis as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think, Amanda, our board matrix that I put up on my screen for a few moments came from Board Source.
Yeah, it looked very familiar because it's exactly the same as ours. I was
okay.
Board Source.
they have great tools, so don't hesitate to use them.
Just a couple minutes left. Tremene, do you have any thoughts on this this last question here? How do you get people who aren't from your community involved in your group?
I think I love the idea of going to conferences, going out in the community, looking at looking online, looking on LinkedIn to see who you can kind of connect with, and making sure that you're present at those potential events to engage in a meaningful way. A lot of folks that people look as being key and critical to being at the table may not necessarily be the best person to be there, right? So you really want someone on your board that's going to be thoughtful, that's going to be able to commit the time and energy in order to help move your organization forward. So I would say, and I would err closer to kind of finding people that are local or finding people that connect closely to the work as being critical partners at the table when it comes to forming the board.
Yeah, and I think it can go to that point earlier about evolution as well. So you've got a board that exists today, and they've been helping you do the things that you've been wanting to do in the last 5 years. Well, what do the next 5 years look like? And it's not about kicking people off because they're not important anymore. It's about finding the people who are going to help you grow into that next evolutionary phase. Maybe you need someone from venture capital on to help you raise money for drug development, or maybe you need a drug development expert. Maybe somebody who worked at the FDA for a while. Those sorts of things can be important thoughts too. Tuesday, your hand is up. I want to get to you before we have to shut down.
One quick thought to add to that, many of the nonprofit management organizations around the country, NICON, Wisconsin Council of Nonprofits, Nonprofit Leadership Center, they do board matching. So a lot of them will have listed positions available to professionals to apply. You can put your board position on those forums. They also have listings of professionals that are looking for board opportunities. You can have a look at those people who are looking for board opportunities. And if something, if there's an attorney, an insurance regulation expert that is looking for a board position, you can certainly ask them to apply for your board. So those are great resources too.
Can I add one more thing, Ben? Sorry, we keep adding. One thing that we did is because it seems like most of the rare disease boards do tend to be parents. We created a parent advisory committee. So that's kind of where our parents start. They serve on like an advisory committee for a couple of years. And then if they're interested and we feel that they're meeting the need of a board or have a strong ability to be on the board, then we can kind of recruit from that pool. But it also gives a chance for parents to be engaged and use the voice that they want to use, because the board really needs to be about strategic planning, fundraising, all that fun stuff. But we just started that and it's been really successful. So that's a way that you could maybe go about board recruitment as well.
Fantastic.
We've done that as well, Amanda, and using those committees, the Family Advisory Council as a funnel has been very successful for us as well.
Awesome.
Helps keep the patients at the center. We did have one last question that I'll just hit real quick myself. From Lindsay Hosefield. It's a question that I'm sure a lot of the attendees have, which is, if you have two main research organizations that haven't collaborated so well in the past, what can you do as a patient-led org to help build or bridge that collaboration? So if it can be done, there are ways to go about doing that. And these folks can certainly lend their expertise offline. But I do want to let you know, tomorrow there is a session called Developing Robust Approaches to Research Collaborations and Partnership. That will be at 11:15 to 1:45 tomorrow. If you're not totally sick of hearing my voice, you'll hear me there. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So you'll get that question answered then. I want to take the last few minutes just to thank our panelists, our speakers today. This has been an absolutely wonderful session. You've hit us with some great knowledge, and I think we've learned a lot together as a group. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.